So we're in Micah 6 again, as we have been for the last 2 weeks, reading from verse 6. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sins of my soul? He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. In week 1, Hugh opened up this amazing little passage for us in Micah, explained to us about the role of the prophets and how they worked, and brought to us this first point, act justly, as he explained it, to do justice, to be a people who would stand in the gap for those who are being dealt with an injustice. What does it look like for us to be a follower of God? Hugh explained to us it looks like someone who will stand up against injustice. Right off the bat, we began to understand that this passage that Micah brings is an outline for a way for us to do life, for us to conduct ourselves. And then last week we took on love mercy, and understanding that love in this passage is more than that February the 14th expression that we're often used to. A deeper covenant to be a person who lives out mercy. That word hesed, mercy, to covenant with the world, that we wouldn't just feel sorry for them, but that we would act upon it. It would go beyond just emotions into action. God, through the prophet Micah, uses these 3 points to highlight what it is that's required of us, not as church attendees, but as his people. To be the people of God, what is expected of us? Hugh reminded in week 1, and we touched on it last week, but to begin again, it also tells us what's not needed. It's not about burnt offerings and bringing all of those sacrifices. It's about the way we live our lives. To act justly, to love mercy, and this week we conclude with that final line, to walk humbly. And once again, and Micah does this, and it's a terrifying consideration when you look at how many words there are in the Bible, but through very simple words, Micah outlines so much about the way we can live our lives, the way God calls us to be his people. So I want us to consider this little part. We're going to take it apart, we're going to put it back together again, and we're going to look at what that means for our lives. I love a dictionary definition. Walk. It's a verb, which is good. Moving at a regular pace by lifting and setting down each foot in turn, never having both feet off the ground at once. I think that's possibly the greatest line in the dictionary. If you're ever worried why you've fallen over, probably both feet are off the ground at the same time. But to move at a regular pace by lifting and setting down each foot in turn, Micah uses the word walk. Now, it's a fascinating observation I have, and I've had the privilege of being a child, of having a child, and then watching other people have children. But we are a people who are fascinated with a child's capacity to move. There's like the things you ask about a child. How heavy were they when they were born? There's a complex for them off the bat. And then we like to know, are they crawling yet? Have they taken their first step? How far can they walk? And then we love to talk about the independence they now have and how hard it is to keep chasing them around once they can walk. But there is this weird fascination. Yes, we love to talk about their hair and the facial expressions, but I promise you, if you sit back for long enough and listen to people talk about children, it will inevitably get back to what is their ability to move. We are fascinated by this idea of moving. And I believe it's because it rooted in each of us is this understanding of the freedom that movement gives us, the independence it allows us. It suddenly opens up a whole world of possibilities. No longer are we confined to the one space we've been plonked in, but now we can get from where we are to where we want to go. To move. To walk is to be moving at a regular pace, to be on the move. Now, Micah may have just used this as the verb to begin this part, or maybe, again, God was saying something deeper through the word walk. I can't help but feel it was an intentional statement. Because God isn't asking for a static church. He isn't asking for us to be sat here in our pews every day of the week like good, obedient followers. No, God wants the church to be active, to be moving. It's a crucial part. And I believe, again, Micah is giving us this inward and this outward expression. Are we on the move in our lives? Are we on the move literally amongst other people? And are we moving in our relationship with God? Are we comfortable to be static where we are, or are we constantly looking for a deeper relationship with him, a deeper understanding of who he is? It is both inward and outward once again. Because the sad truth is, and I've seen it, and I know Mark will have, and I'm sure many of us have, we sit here, we go to our prayer meetings, we pray that God would impact the world around us, and then we just do nothing. And yet we read in Micah this call on us to be the people who are moving amongst the world around us. To God, I believe church is a verb. It's a doing word. It was never about being a static building. And Micah closes this 3-point message with this call to walk, to move. As I said, outwardly, amongst the world around us, but inwardly as well. I wonder, when did you last feel like your relationship with God was moving? I wonder if we were to sit, and we won't do it, so don't panic, but how many of us have just thought, it's just plateaued a little bit. It's just, meh. I go to church, I sing the songs, but I don't really feel God's doing anything. It's funny, we often look at God as the reason behind those moments of plateau, but I believe often it comes down to how are we investing in our relationship with him? Are we looking to move deeper in our relationship with him? I say this with full confidence. I'm aware I'm not perfect. I'm aware there's no one in here perfect, which means each of us have space in our lives to deepen our relationship with God, to fall more in love with him, to understand more of who he is. And in turn, just as Micah highlights, I do believe as we fall more in love with God, we are propelled out of the building and into the world around us. It is about a movement of relationship, both with God and with the communities around us. When did God last find movement in the relationship he has with you? A revelation, a moment of clarity, just an expression, an overflow of joy. When did you last experience that? Because I do believe that inward moment will find an outward working. But it isn't just about going. And we'll each have our understanding of what it looks like for mission and the way we've seen people do things. And many of us have grown up in a culture where the idea of Bible bashing was frequently used. But then we have this next part, humbly. Praise the Lord that there is a dictionary definition for this too. Humbly, an adverb. I had to read what that was. It's like an expression of an action. In a way that shows or suggests a modest or low esteem of one's importance, meekly. The servant bowed humbly before his master. Again, I don't think Micah's just picking words that fit. This is a very deliberate statement in a way that shows or suggests modesty, a low self-esteem of one's importance, meekly. The servant bowed humbly before the master. Before I go on, I want to footnote this off the bat. Humility has so often been weaponized by the church. We've used it as a way of oppressing people, of making people feel like A, they aren't very worthwhile, and B, that they have to continually serve to somehow earn something of God's love. It's not what this is. Humility is not about playing that I am not very good. It is not being weaponized. And the other side of this humility argument is we really love to tell people when they're getting proud. But actually, I see consistently through the Bible a God who delights in the goodness of his people, who celebrates the success of his people. So humbly, and I'm not using it, and I won't ever use it as a way of telling you that you somehow need to do more, or somehow you're falling short. Instead, we need to understand it for what it is, and someone once helped me understand it this way. Humility is a correct understanding of oneself, and in turn, a correct understanding of God. For me to truly find humility, for me to be humble means I need to understand where my capacity genuinely ends and understand that God's capacity just keeps going. When I understand what I can bring to the table, I allow God to mix with all that he has for me through his Spirit, and that's when you begin to see some incredible things. So I don't believe that there's any miscommunication from Micah when he says, walk humbly. Move, but move with that understanding of who you are and who God is. So we need to understand how through Micah God calls us to walk humbly. And again, because everything that I've read in Micah seems to be both an inward and an outward expression. Humility is a fascinating thing if you think about it, because we can all play humble. We can all do it. We can all be humble. You may see me acting humble in church, but the overflow of the heart, the mouth will speak, and false humility will find you out. That's the truth of it. Look at me humbly serving people tea and coffee in church, meekly, putting others above myself. Look at me humbly making sure the young people have all they need. Look at me humbly giving up my pew to the older generation. Look at the way I do this humility. But the problem is, it isn't just about this presentation, because the problem with that is that when it comes to matters of justice, watch me do nothing. Watch me do nothing. When a hurting world needs to receive mercy, watch me decide that they are not as worthy as I am of my time, of my money, of my resources, so I will walk past the need around me. Humility is an incredibly difficult thing for us to grasp, to truly see others, even though we have deemed them unworthy, as important, as significant, as valid. The truth is, for many of us, me included, the church as a general, I believe we need to get down off of our high horse at times. We need to stop thinking of ourselves as more than we are, and the world as less than it is. I just wanted to make sure I covered myself before there were massive complaints coming to Mark and I's office. So I just want us to turn, before you get worried what I'm saying, to Matthew. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Humility is the Son of Man, is Jesus himself coming to earth, the earth that he was a part of creating at the very beginning, and saying, I don't need you to serve me, I'll serve you. Humility personified in Jesus for us. If Jesus Christ did not enter the world knowing it owed him, but instead came to serve the world that would eventually reject him, if it's good enough for Jesus, then it needs to be good enough for us. As his church, we need to understand the importance of humility. So not only do we need to be a people who are walking, who are moving from deeper to deeper relationships with God, which, as you've heard time and time again from the front of this church, is through prayer. It's through reading your Bible, through being in fellowship with one another. That constant deepening of our relationship with God. It's also about moving amongst the world around us, taking something of who God is to us into the places we go, but remembering this humility. Not going in thinking we have all the answers. Not rocking up assuming that somehow we are better than all of those gathered. But coming in with that understanding that Jesus gives us, that we are called to serve. To see others in a value that maybe the rest of the world ignores. Could you imagine what the church would look like if we adopted that position of a servant? As those who would value others, who would champion others, would act justly towards others, would love mercy and stand in the gap for others. I do believe that's the model of church that we're called to. Micah outlines amazingly the significant impact that the church could have if we put down that need for burnt offerings and picked up the actions of the heart. Because that opening line is so important. And what does the Lord require of you? There's so many things over the years. I've grown up in church for far too many years than I want to admit. There's so many things I was told I should do. Memorize Bible verses. Hand out flyers at the start. Serve on tea and coffee. All of these other things, please hear me, none of them are bad. But very rarely was I told that there were these simple things I could implement to deepen my relationship with God, to stand against injustice, to not just feel sad when I watch things on comic relief, but to actually do something about the state of the world I find myself in. And to realize that the call isn't just to keep turning up every Sunday, but to live out something of my faith in the world that I find myself in the other 6 days of the week. We can add so much to it, and yet Micah in these 6 words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words, does such a good job of giving us an understanding of what's required. The problem's this: you may have come to the same conclusion as I did midweek. It is so much easier just to bring the burnt offering. I mean, honestly, Micah, could we not have had, or just bring more cows? You know what, just more oil. It would be so much easier for me to just walk through life and go, you know what, I've messed up, so I'm going to rock up on Sunday and I'm going to get on my knees and I'm going to say, I'm really sorry, God. And then next week I'll probably walk straight back into exactly the same problem. It would be easier, right? That's the truth of it. It would be so much easier for us just to accept that the world is broken, it's hurting, and that's just how it's going to be. I'm just going to watch less news, talk to less people, just introvert a bit more. It'd be easier, right? It'd be far easier if Mark and I stood at the front and said, you know what, guys, we're going to convert some of the church into some bedrooms, and we're all just going to live here, and we're going to be happy, and we're going to not be affected by the sin of the world, and we're going to be good. It'd be easier. But it would be nothing of the heart of God we see expressed through the pages of the Bible. It would speak nothing of the truth we've seen in the lives of others lived out in some of the worst situations in the world. Micah doesn't really give us an easy way out. But those of you who are astute will have picked up on the fact that our little slide isn't the whole story. It doesn't just simply end with these 3 lovely points for us to preach from. The kicker is, the important thing is, the final line. How do I act justly? Well, I do it with my God at my side. How do I love mercy? I do it with God at the center of all I do. How do I walk humbly? I do it with my God. None of this was ever meant to be about Tim's best efforts or Mariah's best efforts or anyone here's best efforts. This was always meant to be about how we live out our lives of faith with God. I had the most fascinating conversation at the end of the service last week with Helen, and we were just talking about the struggle that we can face sometimes with that call to justice. Or sometimes when someone's hurt us, how hard it is to forgive them and show mercy to them and not feel like somehow we need to just distance ourselves from them. And that's the reality that each of us face. And Micah heads all of that reality off with those final 3 words. How do I find the strength to do it? With God. With God by my side, with God in my life, with an awareness and my eyes open to who God is, I am able to be present in situations that otherwise would have crushed me. Through my relationship with God, through my dependence on Him, through taking Him as my source of strength, I am able to look the person in the eye that has offended me, has hurt me, and has betrayed me and say, you know what? I forgive you. All of this only works with God at the center. You could take the with your God out and you would have a model for a great society. But it would fall apart eventually. People would get frustrated with each other. Injustice would end up being rife. The crucial part is that we do all of this with our God, keeping Him at the center. And to conclude not only this Sunday, but to conclude this whole little mini-series we've had on Micah, I find it fascinating that as I drew this to a close, it came to a point that was never how I imagined it would. If I'm honest, I didn't really think that far ahead. I just thought it was cool to have 3 words, or 3 little passages, sorry. But I do believe that here we see something, and it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And actually, the more that I've spent time looking through the Bible, the more I've seen that it isn't just some New Testament ideology. It's actually littered throughout the Old Testament as well. Because I believe in this little model that Micah gives us, that God uses Micah to share with us, is the foundation for discipleship. This is what it looks like to be a disciple of Christ. How do I follow Jesus? Well, I need to seek the justice that Jesus sought out and stood for. And I need to love the lost and the broken in the same way that Jesus extended his hand towards those who were deemed unclean. And I need to show the humility that says, I've not walked into this room so all of you will serve me, but be willing to serve others as Jesus did. This is a foundational understanding through these little passages, or this one passage in Micah, of what discipleship looks like. The response of the heart of a disciple, of that godly heart, of the heart that Micah calls us to, is both outward to do justice. It is inward to love mercy, and it is upward to walk humbly with our God. This is a whole life model. A whole life model of what it looks like to be a follower of Christ, to resemble the life that he lived. And we are so privileged because not only do we have these words from Micah, we have the gospel message, those stories and accounts of what Jesus did, of how he lived out what it was to do these things. And we are then called to be his disciples, to follow close enough behind him to get the dust from his sandals on our feet, that when people see us, they see something of Jesus in the way we live our lives. That's what we're called to. I find it incredible that the creator of the entire world decided that I was one of the best people he could use to represent him. And yet that's what he's done. He's entrusted his church, us, his people, to represent him in this community, in the lives of those around you, your friends and your family. How do I take all that I hear into the lives of those around me? Well, I need to be someone who is seen to stand up for justice, someone who shows mercy, someone who has humility, someone who is dependent upon their relationship with God. Jesus showed us what it is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. The challenge for each of us is, how will we take that forward? It seems so simple written there, and yet we know the reality of the challenge. We know how hard it can be in our daily lives. So it's with that reassurance that we do not go into those places alone. We do not fight those battles on our own. We do it with God by our side, his Spirit at work within us, deepening our relationship with him and deepening our impact on the world around us.